You're listening to Dateline Latin America, Tear Gas and Tango with
Joe Goldman, 37 years with ABC News, then with UPI, with The Village Voice, and many other.
And me, Daniel Schweimler, originally from London, formerly of the BBC, 19 years, and more recently with Al Jazeera English across Latin America.
They'll be sitting at a kitchen table in Buenos Aires talking about their journalistic adventures across the region, covering earthquakes, flooding and fires, talking to presidents, charlatans, sports stars and other newsmakers. In short, journalism and the state of the world.
Joe, welcome. Hello.
Hello, Daniel. How are you doing? Beautiful day in Buenos Aires.
Yeah, in Buenos Aires, yes, not so much in Gaza. I'm a little blown away, I must say, today by the news of the killings of, colleagues of mine. I didn't know them personally, but the 5 Al Jazeera journalists who were terrible, targeted by Israeli forces. Anas al-Sharif, 28-year-old, married with 2 small children, huge reputation in the region. And Israeli forces had named him, they'd put a target on him some time ago. I mean, the BBC's Jeremy Bowen, a well-respected journalist, has seen this supposed evidence that Israel had that he is a terrorist, is a Hamas member, and he calls it, and very politely, unconvincing. Yeah. And I don't think anybody in their right mind is convinced, believes that, al-Sharif was a terrorist of any sort. He was too busy working every single day in front of the camera. So, I mean, this has got to stop.
It's incredible. It's absolutely incredible, and it absolutely has to stop. Yeah. And not only was he killed, but I understand 6 other people.
Yeah.
And there was his crew, which was 4 other people, and 2 collateral damage innocent bystanders.
Yeah. I mean, I was out on Saturday in Buenos Aires. There was a big anti-Israel, pro-Palestine march calling on, the famine, the enforced famine to end, the killing to end. I mean, not one of the biggest marches I've seen in Buenos Aires, but certainly bigger than in previous weeks. Very loud. We were using images from Chile. We had a team working in Santiago. Again, the biggest crowd they've had for a long time. Numbers are growing. People are getting angrier. They're frustrated. And this was members of the Arab community, the Palestinian community. As we know, Chile is the largest Palestinian community outside of the Middle East. But this was just people, ordinary people, not connected directly in any way, just angry, upset, frustrated, who felt they had to voice their opinions on the streets. And I guess with our president, Javier Milei, inviting Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to Buenos Aires in September. If he takes that invitation, I don't know what the mood on the streets will be like.
Talked about all the Jewish institutions here have been reinforced just by the problems in the Middle East. If Netanyahu comes here, I don't even want to think about the horrendous security situation in general here. If some kind of terrorist act should happen, there's no way this government has the means to stop it.
No, I mean, and why Milei does this, who knows? I mean, he's a democratically elected president, yet often shows these kind of dictatorial tendencies.
Yeah.
So which we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about dictators and democratically elected presidents of Latin America with dictatorial tendencies. I mean, you've known a few, haven't you?
Yes. And we're going to talk a little bit about sexual proclivity in those dictators, and it's something that I hope our ratings will go through the roof with this. We should mention that if you're 18 years or younger, you should be aware that there's going to be some language that you might not like.
I mean, who springs to mind for you as one of the most dictatorial? I mean, there's been so many right back from independence, first early part of the 19th century onwards. There's been some weird and wacky dictators in Latin America.
The whole Paraguay situation with Lopez, and what strikes me right now is Milei, who is different in some ways because, excuse me for saying this, but he does these crazy sexual things, and he's a bit psychopathic. So you got that. That's a real combination. Let me tell you. I remember I've been saying to people that Milei reminds me of Abdel Bucaram, who was president for only 1 year in Ecuador. He was impeached. And I actually was in Ecuador, not even working. I was just there visiting years ago, 87, I think it was. And Bucaram came back from enforced exile in Panama because he had been found with a trunk full of cocaine. He came back as a hero because they threw out the charges. He came to the airport in Guayaquil, came out of the airplane screaming, I'm Maradona, I'm Pele, I'm Jesus Christ. He went down and he had a speech. And as part of his speech, at one point, he said, if I'm elected president, because he announced his run for presidency, I will make sure, and he clicked his fingers, like snapped his fingers. His sister, Inez, who was the mayor of Guayaquil, took down her shirt, bared her tits to the crowd, and he said, if I'm elected, the Yankees will never touch these tits.
Unbelievable.
That's
Unbelievable.
the kind of stuff that, I mean, it was like, I could not believe that. And he didn't get elected in the next election, but the one after that, he was elected president with about 60% of the vote.
I mean, we always come back to this question, although we know, I mean, he was known as El Loco Bucaram, wasn't he? The Mad
Yeah.
Bucaram, popularly known as. And yet these people don't try to hide their sexual proclivities, their weirdness. And in the olden days, if you were seen to be a bit loony, you that you lost the candidacy. You weren't elected. It didn't work in Javier Milei's case. We knew all about. I mean, he kept talking about tantric sex. What is that? What was that all about?
He said he was an expert in tantric sex, which meant that you cannot come to orgasm before 45 minutes. That's how he put it.
When he should have been talking about the economy, about
Yes.
crime, about relations with neighboring countries. This him talking about his dogs. He talked about his dogs a lot, and he talked about his sex life. I mean, did we need to know? And now that we do know, why would people still vote for somebody who does that?
You covered more than I did, I think, Fernando Lugo in Paraguay.
Yeah. He came to power after 61 years of the Colorado, a kind of feudalistic party. Alfredo Stroessner, the dictator, being the most obvious president during that period. He came to power. He was a Roman Catholic bishop in Paraguay. I mean, promised a great deal. Really, kind of changed the whole political landscape.
Because he ran outside the Colorado party.
Exactly, yeah, which people had absolutely had enough of. But came to office. Obviously, he'd made his vows of celibacy as a Roman Catholic priest, and then almost immediately he came to power. Women all over Paraguay were saying, "Well, he fathered my child. I had relations with him," and some accusations of sexual assault as well also started to emerge. This in a country possibly one of the most patriarchal, machist, macho countries in Latin America. That's a tough one to pin down. These accusations were all over the place, and some of them proved in later life, using his role as a bishop, as a priest, to take advantage of some women. But then also stories emerged afterwards. And I interviewed him on one occasion. Went to interview him, had an interview booked for the following day, went to a meeting the previous evening, and we were setting up our equipment, setting up our camera, and somebody tapped me on the shoulder. And I looked around and he said, do you want to interview me? And it was the president, well, he was then the ex-president of Paraguay. I must say, this was a couple of years after year after he left office, saying, do you want to interview me? And I said, well, we've got an interview booked with you tomorrow morning. I don't need to do it now. Thank you very much, sir. And we spoke to him the next day. But I remember speaking to a member of his team while we were waiting for the interview to happen, talking about the frustrations of trying to control him while he was president on foreign tours, and told me about the time they were in Thailand, I think it was, had a meeting with the president, prime minister booked, and Fernando Lugo, president, was nowhere to be found. And in the end, they managed to keep knocking on his hotel door. In the end, they managed to drag him out, and he was in there with one, maybe two prostitutes, late for the meeting with, the top officials in the country he was visiting. So difficult man to control, a bit of an embarrassment as well.
We also have to say, with the Bill Clinton's history, with Monica Lewinsky and God knows how many other people, with our current president, Donald Trump, I think there are 27 women who claim that he either raped them or in some way physically harassed them.
And obviously, they try their best. Most people, maybe not Milei, but most try to keep them under wraps. And then these stories often emerge afterwards. I mean, some of the things that Jair Bolsonaro was, his attitude to women, his attitude to sex in general. I mean, one of the most, macho, horrendous characters with no qualms about, some of the things he spoke about, especially his relationship to homosexuality. Famously said he would rather one of his sons, died in a car crash than admit to him that he might be gay. And again, you've got a president openly saying these things, yet still winning the support of vast numbers of their populations.
Even some gay
Yeah,
people.
exactly. Yeah.
We can say this, that there's something about what's going on with Milei, what happened with Bolsonaro. It's almost that they're in between Puritanism and pornography.
Hmm.
There's some kind of middle ground or something, or they go between one and the other. Of course, Millet and his treatment of homosexuals has been absolutely awful. In Davos, in the World Economic Forum, he said that gay couples, if they were adopting children, they would rape them. It caused a tremendous, tremendous scandal. And he's spoken time after time about the whole situation with gays. And he has a whole thing about pedophilia. He says gays and pedophiles are the same thing. Then he's made this famous statement that the state, the government, I'll read this and translate it. The state is a pedophile in kindergartens with kids chained up and bathed in Vaseline. He made that statement, and it was like, whoa, whoa, give me a break. And he makes statements that are absolutely horrendous almost all the time. There's a local novelist who I think is really a great observer, Martin Cohen, and he made a statement about Millet. Said 2 or 3 times a week we have to be victims or involuntary witnesses to the fantasies of sexual aggression, of anal sex by the president. He can't stop himself from publicly expressing this. I know he says these things as metaphors, but it's clear that metaphors express much more clearly the literal meaning inside one's head. I can't remember the chief of state, Millet, saying this in relation to a pleasurable experience. All is related to rape and submission. All this talk about anal sex, it's not only anal sex. It's the submission of his political adversaries to this violation. It's rare that we pass a week without Millet speaking this way, and he lacks the courtesy of saving us from these diatribes.
Yeah, unbelievable. And what it does, obviously, you've got the president, the elected president of your nation talking like this. It sets the tone. It makes homophobes in this country, and anyway, the same happened in Brazil. It gives them carte blanche, freedom to go out and express their views. Shortly after he came to office, there was that horrendous attack on a house where several lesbians were killed. A guy set fire to the house. It was an arson attack. It was a blatant murder, but somebody who obviously felt he had the freedom, because the president had more or less said he could, to go out and do what he did. So, speaking to people from the LGBTQ community after that attack and after the speech in Davos, I mean, people were saying they're much more scared to walk the streets, because of this mood created by the president of the country. I mean, days after he took office in December 2023, there was a beautiful salon in the Casa Rosada, the presidential palace, which was portraits of famous women throughout Argentine history. And one of the first orders he gave was take those down. Replaced all the portraits with, soldiers, liberation fighters, basically men in old military uniforms and swords, instead of the women who
the misogyny inside his head. I know we compare him sometimes to Menem, but I think Menem was a very different character. Certainly had his sexual strange behavior sexually,
Hmm.
but it was not attacking people that way. It was more like he was priding himself on hanging out with gorgeous women and
Hmm.
stuff like that.
He was more
And
your old-fashioned playboy, wasn't he? Kind
yeah,
of president in the 90s,
and I don't think
there's,
he was ever accused of
hmm,
sexual harassment or anything like
no.
that.
Apart from his wife, though, Sulema, did he not throw her out of the presidential palace? There
Yes,
was a
I have
famous
covered
case of,
that. For television, it was pretty wild to have all their clothes on the sidewalk outside the government house. And the kids also, who were not kids at that time, probably about 20 and 18 years old, having to deal with this
hmm,
situation. It was stunning.
in the pub with the whole nation watching, obviously. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, eccentric presidents. I mean, who else have you come across over the years? I mean, who kind of sticks in your mind that you've either met or
Well,
watched in
I've
action?
met him and I've covered him. Daniel
Oh, Daniel
Ortega.
Ortega, yeah. Oh, another one with a.
Daniel Ortega, his wife's daughter, wasn't Daniel's fathering of her, is somebody who I've known, actually. She came here. I've met her in Argentina. I knew her other son. She was raped. She talks about it openly by Daniel Ortega. And
Hmm.
Rosario, Daniel's wife, her mother, did not support her.
Hmm.
She was forced to leave the country in exile because of this incident. And it's apparently something that Daniel Ortega has been involved with other people in ways where he was a dictator, a sexual
Mm.
dictator, I
Mm.
like to say.
I mean, a man who came to office in Nicaragua, the hero of the revolution, wasn't he, in the
That's
1980s? Left office, came back to office, again, democratically elected, but since then has manipulated fraudulent elections, and is pretty much running the country as one of the weirder dictators. More,
yeah.
I mean, aren't they all weird, one way or the other? Whether you're talking Papa Doc or Baby Doc Duvalier,
Once again,
yeah,
he's been elected,
yeah.
which,
Mm.
I have many friends who have been either jailed or exiled in the last 5 years in Nicaragua, and it's a terrible situation. It's so funny that we're talking about Latin America and strange sexual behavior and stuff
Mm.
like that. This is the place where the Catholic Church has been so important. Of course, we had a pope from Argentina, and the new pope spent a whole bunch of his time in northern Peru. The Catholic Church has been very, very powerful. What do you think about that combo?
I mean, I've done stories on sexual abuse by Catholic priests, both in Chile and in Argentina. A big story in Argentina 6 or 7 years ago, while our Argentine Pope was still very much in office, but had done almost nothing to help the investigations into the abuse. And groups from the United States came to Buenos Aires, were interviewing some of the victims. They stood out on the steps of the cathedral in the Plaza de Mayo in Buenos Aires saying, look, we've got an Argentine Pope who's doing nothing to help us. And then when he was asked to investigate similar cases in Chile, pretty much exonerated everybody. And a whole bunch of bishops in Santiago were kind of resigned, so pretty much, and were called to the Vatican. And then Pope Francis said, yeah, maybe you're right and I was wrong. It's maybe time to investigate.
There was
But
tremendous pressure
yeah, yeah,
on the Pope
yeah.
at that point.
But reticent in the early days, always to get involved, to kind of shine this very negative light on goings on in Latin America.
No, it's a very interesting region where the church is so powerful, and yet you have these, let's call it deviant sexual behavior, and it's stunning.
But one of the reasons, probably, why the evangelical church has grown so massively and rapidly, certainly in places like Brazil, Argentina, to an extent, right across Latin America. Yet, these are the churches generally which are some of the most staunch supporters of your right wing, libertarian, eccentric presidents, Jair Bolsonaro, Javier Milei, we always come back to them. One of the reasons Milei is courting support of Israel, for instance, is he knows he gets the support of the evangelical church, evangelical right. And it was always interesting covering some of the early rallies of Bolsonaro in Brazil and some of Milei's rallies, the Israeli flag being flown.
Yeah.
Alongside the flags of the countries we're talking about, and these are people who talk about family, and at the same time, they're willing, and Donald Trump the same, they're willing to accept a president, support a president with these sexual proclivities.
Millet is also an example. He's never been married. As we know, he's never really had any important relationship in his life. In a country where people always talk about family, you talk about getting the family together on Sunday for a pasta lunch, whatever. The whole idea of family seems so important here. They've elected a president who really shuns family in so many ways. I mean, he has a sister as his bodyguard or whatever.
First lady, I think, isn't she? Counts as
First lady. And he has a pretty horrible family situation of abuse by the father. The mother certainly did not protect the kids. And I mean, he's talked about this. And then he's back together with his family as if nothing happened.
Right. And it's not necessarily just of the right. We've got to be fair here and say some of the more left-wing presidents have also had accusations against them. Daniel Ortega certainly. Evo Morales, I'm not sure that case has got much traction, but this idea that while he was president, he fathered a child with a 15-year-old girl.
That never was proven.
No, never proven. But the accusations, and it is often used as a tool by the right to demean the left-wing presidents. But there's again cases that should be investigated. They should be brought into the open. Evo Morales, yes, always denied it, and it very ended up is still, I think, in hiding up in his Cochabamba hideout, trying to stand for election on the 17th of August, constitutionally barred from doing so, but insistent that he should again be voted in as president. But with this case hanging over him, his of the 15-year-old girl as she was then.
Yeah, no, it's a weird. I don't know that it's left or right. I think people vote in weird people.
Yeah.
Javier Milei is somebody who, I mean, he's almost puritanical. Going back to that puritanical versus pornographic, he approaches everything almost in a puritanical manner. He claims that sex is promoted by communists, socialists, whatever. He uses sex as a way of buttonholing people in ways that are, first, they're not true, and second, it's kind of just bizarre. And I got to say, he's been fairly successful at that.
That's the thing. If you find you can be as weird and as weird as you like, yet if you find the votes keep coming in and people keep supporting you, why not just get even weirder still? I guess is the temptation. If it does you no harm at the ballot box. I mean, another one, again, it's always interesting. We have the privilege in many ways of seeing some of these presidents close up. I mean, one of the strangest, not in an unpleasant way, was Hugo Chavez, former president of Venezuela. And once he came, I saw him once in Spain. He was trying to raise money for flood victims in Venezuela, and just standing there talking for hours and hours, kind of for one moment putting his hand in his pocket, and then just taking something out of his pocket and say, "Oh, look what I found," and talking to a group of heads of state, NGOs, of all sorts of for the great and the good of Spain, just discussing and then making fun of the Guardia Civil, the civil guards' hats, and just the strangest behavior.
I could never understand. I covered him here in Argentina. He made a long, long speech at the law school here. And I just remember listening, and people were cheering things that I just thought were stupid. Excuse me for saying that. But I mean, look, he went into the United Nations and he was speaking after George W. Bush. I'm no big fan of George W. Bush, whatever. I'm not defending him. But he gets up there and he says, "There's a smell of rotten eggs here." Give me a break.
Yeah. Oh, is this accusing him of being the devil? He's saying that rotten eggs are like sulfur, so the devil must have been here or something. Yeah. That was his implication, wasn't it?
So I never got that. Although I have to say that I don't think any kind of crazy sexual behavior.
Not as far as we know.
Uh,
I saw him once at the Sheraton Hotel in Buenos Aires. He was on his way to talk to the president then, or I think a rally in Uruguay. And he stopped in the hotel, gave a big speech. And he started the speech. He went to the microphone. And then for about 4 or 5 minutes was just going, Dracula, Dracula, Dracula is the United States, which is sucking the blood from Latin America. I mean, there's your soundbite right there. I didn't record anything else. I think I went back to the office and put that in my radio package and left it there. But it was the weirdest thing, you know. And again, hugely popular until he died. I think 2013 he died. But yeah, you could be as strange as you like, whether it's sexually, socially, whatever,
yeah.
and get away with it.
We will see. I mean, also, let's talk about Trump. There was a famous incident here with Millet where he went to a junior high school. It was actually the junior high school he went to, and he spoke to a group of students, and he made a really off-color joke about the size of a donkey's penis. These were kids. I mean, they were 10, 11-year-old kids there. It reminded me in some ways of Donald Trump, who on the campaign trail was talking about Arnold Palmer, the golfer's penis, being a tremendous penis. We have had some real winners in politics, and somebody will do a study someday, I think, about this period of time, especially with people like Bolsonaro, people like Trump, people like Boris Johnson, people like Millet. Millet is the strangest example of this. But we're living through some weird times, Daniel.
Shall we leave it there, Joe, on that note before it gets even stranger? And,
Probably, yes.
and we'll talk again next week.
I think we're going to bring up some things about Bolivia.
Elections on the 17th of August. They look like being interesting, controversial as they always seem to be in Bolivia. So we'll talk next week.
Sounds great.